Airways, it started, what, about a year ago,
yeah,
right?
with the president of the People Express, Mr. Peretti. And out there, America West, operating out of Phoenix, is making money. You do have new carriers able to come in and have the advantage of flexibility, and that may avoid some of the errors that people made. Well, wouldn't you think, though, that if you were thinking about starting an airline, you would think twice about following the People Express model? Of course you would. There does, however, seem to be something about the romance of forming an airline that seems to drive otherwise rational investors slightly crazy. And that is going to be a continued protection of consumers. But that isn't the only protection. I'd like to have a chance at some point to say what happens if I'm wrong and this industry really does end up to be a tight oligopoly of, say, only 3 or 4 carriers. I don't think it likely, but that's not the time to say that we've been defeated at all. Robin's going to give you a chance in a minute, I promise. If you promise, Jim. That's a promise. Robin?
Mr. Maldutis, if People goes out of business, is that the end of discount fare competition?
No, quite to the contrary. I would argue that we will continue to see very aggressive price competition, and I think you will see next year some very innovative pricing, which will follow along the lines of theater tickets or baseball tickets. You will have no refundability. It will be purchase the ticket, and if you don't fly, you will lose it. It will come at great discount, and it will be available months in advance.
Even more discount than...
Probably, perhaps so. So to that extent, I expect to see greater competition in the industry.
Now, are you predicting that in countries, in companies with nationwide or very large service, or just small regional specialized market service?
I think the large established carriers have learned some extremely painful lessons from the People's Express and others, that they must be price competitive. They have been extremely successful in reducing their labor costs. For example, some carriers today, the old carriers, have costs that are equal to, if not lower, to People's Express. I would also argue that the price of entry to the industry, and I would disagree with Dr. Kahn on this point, that the price of entry into the industry is becoming very high. If we have another carrier that fails, the financial markets are not that foolhardy that they will continue to finance the so-called romance.
What about that, Dr. Kahn?
Well, I'm sure that that's partially true, but the fact is that in 1984, which is the most prosperous year that they've had for a long, long time, some 40 carriers failed, and yet since then we've had some new ventures. I'm not saying that, I mean, Mr. Maldutis is the one who's sitting there on all those other people's money more than I, but the fact is that there have been new carriers formed.
Well, the question is, in today's market, with all the factors you've mentioned, is it still possible for a new airline to come along and make it on as a discount airline? Let me ask Dr. Lewin about that.
Well, if you regard the financial markets as the only source of funding, the answer becomes more no than yes. But if you regard employees as a source of funding, as we have seen in People Express, the answer moves over a little more to yes. I think it would be a shame if the lessons taught by People Express on the employee relations policies in relation to financing the airline were lost, and you used modest investment capital and modest stock ownership initially to help fund this airline. I don't see any structural reason why that couldn't continue to occur in the future. But if I may just add a point on competition that has been mentioned by both Dr. Kahn and Mr. Maldutis, I would submit to you that over the next 4 to 5 years, which is a reasonable planning cycle, it's not just competition from other air carriers that this business has to worry about. It is competition from the telecommunications, electronics, and information processing firms. Because if you ask yourself, what business is the airline in, it's not just in the transportation business. It's in the communications business. Firms will find over the next 4 to 5 years reduced costs, more efficient production of teleconferencing and telecommunications, so they don't have to send 12 to 15 to 20 executives up in the sky with a high opportunity cost, possible risk, to go meet in a location. So if you're talking about competition in this industry, I would submit for the future, it's not just the question of a People Express and a Presidential versus an American. It's the industry as a whole versus other substitutes for a portion of its market base.
Okay, now so that we keep our promise to Alfred Kahn and get back to the way the airline industry is going to shake out, do you agree that it's entering a phase of consolidation, that a lot of the new carriers and some of the old ones are going to shake out and we're going to end up with a few consolidated big airlines?
Yes.
My judgment is that we will have approximately 8 to 9 very large nationwide carriers with nationwide route systems, and then a multitude of small specialized carriers. Many of these carriers are already entering in collaborative marketing agreements, which is a form of consolidation. We've had 3 major mergers that have been announced. We may see some more mergers. I would expect that this entire consolidation phase is going to be completed by the end of this year, or at least we will know the shape of it.
And so you're predicting 8 or 9. That's not very different from what there is today. 8 or 9 national carriers and a lot of regional ones feeding them.
That is correct.
So you're not predicting a radical consolidation?
Absolutely.
And what do you think?
Well, I rather like that description, because if we look at other industries that have been deregulated, banking, the securities houses, trucking, what do we find? We find a very substantial shakeout with new entrants and consolidations. So competition breeds winners and it breeds losers. And I myself think that there will be a substantial number of carriers. Whether 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 is the right figure, I don't know.
Now, Alfred Kahn, you think it could be as few as 6, or perhaps even fewer, and you have some fear that that would lead to what you called slovenly monopolistic ways.
Well, you're not really going to succeed in starting a fight between me and these other 2 gentlemen. I think
that is not our purpose.
I know that. It certainly is not going to get below 6, and it may well be 7 or 8, and I think each of us could name what those systems are likely to be. There are...
Oh, name what you think they're likely to be.
Well, I think you're going to have an American system, and we're not going to let them engage in any major acquisitions. You'll have a United system. You have this Texas Air Continental system. You have a TWA maybe joining with somebody, whether it's Western as well as Ozark, maybe even with Delta, but that still leaves a 4th system. You've got a Piedmont system, and I'm sure I've missed 1 or 2 major ones.
Anyone want to add in on this? What do you think? We haven't got up to your 8 or 9 yet.
I would agree with almost all of the choices. I would add only Northwest Airlines, which is the financially strongest company. You have Southwest Airlines, another very financially strong company. So
nobody's mentioned Pan Am in this. Where do
well, Pan Am and TWA may still have to resolve the leadership on the North Atlantic.
I see. In other words, you are all agreed that the purpose that people has served in really revolutionizing the industry and throwing this whole new door of competition open, that is not going to be closed if people itself goes out of business, that the threat, as Dr. Kahn says, is still going to be there. Do you all agree on that?
Agreed.
Now, what about the point that Mr. Maldutis made earlier, that we're about to see a lot of really innovative fare structuring and everything? I mean, do you agree with that? Do you see even more changes coming for the average air traveler?
I think we'll see some innovations in prices, because I think one of the lessons that People has offered, and some other originally regional carriers have offered, is that you can do some innovation on the price side. But I think we ought to remember that a number of the majors have been fairly innovative on the price side, what with the discount fares and the variety of techniques they have used. What strikes me is that the big lesson for those carriers is perhaps less in the pricing than it is on the employee relations policies. How long ago was it where we could have cited an Eastern and a Western, not as leading examples, but as facts, that have employees on the boards of directors? How long ago was it that you couldn't take an airline employee performing a narrow job and ask him to do a second job? Many of the airlines have gone to this, and I think the People Express story has had that spillover effect.
What about briefly, Dr. Kahn, what about the proposal somebody suggested to me the other day, that you may end up with airlines flying one plane first class, another plane all full fare economy class, another plane all discount fares, and you get into a kind of class differences either between airlines or within an airline. Do you agree?
I would disagree with that. 2 statistics. During the month of May, 90% of all domestic air travelers flew at a discount fare, and that includes business travelers as well as vacation travelers. So discount fare structure is virtually available to everyone in the United States. The second statistic, there have been several carriers that attempted first-class service that are no longer in business. Regent Air, for example, which flew from Newark to Los Angeles, was a lavishly designed service, and it failed because the market was just not there.
I'd like to hear your other observations on that, but that's the end of our time. Alfred Kahn in Syracuse, thank you for joining us. David Lewin, Mr. Maldutis.
And keep your promise.